Feminism, the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of the equality of the sexes. The focal point of feminism has evolved throughout the length of the movement. As time moves on, more and more controversial issues are surfaced and dealt with. However, the topic of abortion is seemingly one of the longest-lasting issues to remain in the eyes of progressive feminists. The first wave, although not directly focused on abortion, attempted to gain voting rights so they could influence legislation on future issues. The second wave of feminism, however, brought the issue itself to the forefront and resulted in the landmark case of Roe v. Wade. The topic of abortion did not disappear, however, due to the constant challenges and limitations the issue faced. It became one of the largest, most controversial problems in America.
Mainly starting in the early 1800s, women began to be concerned with the rights they had. Limiting factors were taken into consideration, and oppression from men became the most identifiable factor that caused women to be abused and pushed into positions, such as abortion. Abortion was not taken into consideration by men, and women suffered greatly due to how often and abusively they were pushed into these positions. And as she stated, and these were perpetual reminders of men's incapacity to cope successfully with the monstrous evil of society. Women knew they wouldn't have any voice in changing this, and the best way to change the way that they were treated was to first obtain the right to vote. And with the right to vote came a louder and more recognizable voice to bring women a right to their own body. The beginning of first-wave feminism is marked with the Convention of Declaration of Sentiments held in Seneca Falls, July 20th, 1848. The Declaration of Sentiments was written based off the Declaration of Independence, as it stated, "All men and women are created equal." It was written to compare the issues our founding fathers came across to the issues women were facing during the movement. Stanton stated during the convention in her keynote address, "We have met here today to discuss our rights and wrongs, civil and political, and not as some have supposed, to go into detail of social life alone. We do not propose to petition the legislature to make our husbands just, generous, and courteous, to see every man at the head of a cradle, and to clothe every woman in male attire." Stanton specifically excluded abortion because gaining suffrage was a current priority. All resolutions but the right to vote were accepted, which raised a lot of concerns and caused women to adjust more factors and did not allow them to gain the right to vote, such as education, family responsibilities, and having no voice in political debates. Later in 1850, Susan B. Anthony met Elizabeth Cady Stanton and attempted to influence Congress to include women in the 14th and 15th Amendment, which stated, "No state shall make or enforce any law which shall deprive any persons of life, liberty, property." Then in 1869, Stanton and Anthony founded the National Women's Suffrage Association, which opposed the 15th Amendment because it ignored women's suffrage. The 15th Amendment stated, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude." Abortion was still not emphasized as a primary goal. It was the right to vote that was so important in order to be heard on these issues. Then in 1869, Lucy Stone formed the American Women's Suffrage Association, and after the Women's Suffrage Amendment was introduced in 1878, it was brought to a halt, so she began to attempt to expand voting rights to federal approach. In 1880, the movement began to speed up and activities began to increase. The NWSA and AWSA collaborated to form the National American Women's Suffrage Association and was led by Stanton and Anthony, later gaining support from more women and organizations. The NAWSA began attempting to intensify the movement, causing Washington, California, Arizona, Kansas, and Oregon to extend the right to vote to women. Later in 1917, President Woodrow Wilson decided to urge Congress to pass a voting rights amendment. The voting rights amendment failed in the Senate in 1918, later winning again in 1919 and being ratified when Tennessee was the 36th state to approve it. Gaining the right to vote, women had a more recognizable voice. Women were now able to take part in political decisions and be heard. With the right to vote, they could be heard about their concerns regarding infanticide and abortion.
The second wave of feminism in America took place in the early 1960s through the 1980s. One big goal during this time period was legalizing abortion. Many organizations formed for the cause, and laws were made that helped lead to the legalization of abortion in the U.S. during the movement. The legalization of abortion came as a result of this movement because of other major events and victories that happened during the second wave of feminism. Some of the major events were: in 1963, Betty Friedan came out with the best-selling book, Feminine Mystique. This book is most known to be what sparked the second wave of feminism. One other event was, before the issue of abortion was resolved, women fought for equal pay in the workplace, which they got with the Equal Pay Act in 1963. The Equal Pay Act made it unlawful for employers to reduce the wages of either sex and to equalize pay between men and women. One of the biggest cases to help lead to legal abortion was Griswold versus Connecticut in 1965. The case happened when the executive director, medical director, and licensed physician of Planned Parenthood League of Connecticut were convicted as accessories for giving married persons information and medical advice on how to prevent conception and prescribing a contraceptive device for the wife's use. A Connecticut statute makes it a crime for any person to use any drug or article to prevent conception. The Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution implies a right to privacy. This was a big victory in the push for abortion because it appropriated methods of preventing childbirth. Another major event in the feminist movement was the formation of NOW, the National Organization for Women.
To put pressure on the EOC to do its job and implement the law for women, and the idea that they had a fear that Richard Graham wasn't going to be reappointed as a commissioner, those two things led to the founding of NOW.
NOW is the largest organization of feminist grassroots activists in the United States. They focused on education, employment, the role of women in the family, women's political rights, and images of women in the media. Right before the great abortion case of Roe v. Wade, there was the Equal Rights Amendment in 1972. The ERA was an amendment proposed to the United States Constitution with the purpose of guaranteeing equal rights of all citizens regardless of gender.
The other day, the state of Connecticut ratified the so-called Equal Rights Amendment, bringing at that point the total to 28 states out of the 38 required to graft the amendment onto the Constitution. The national chairman of the movement to stop ERA is Mrs. Phyllis Schlafly, who is here today and raring to go.
Well, it's the very innocuous wording of the amendment that is the reason why many people didn't realize in the beginning what unfortunate consequences it would have. But fortunately, the amending process calls for a full-blown debate in the state legislatures around the country, and this is where we find out some of the things that were not originally realized by many people who voted for it. We find, as we look into the matter, that ERA won't give women anything which they haven't already got or have a way of getting. But on the other hand, it will take away from women some of the most important rights and benefits and exemptions we now have.
The amendment was well in the works to ratification until Phyllis Schlafly was able to prevent it with her group because she believed that traditional gender roles were freeing to women and that the ERA would disadvantage housewives and cause women to be drafted into the military. Phyllis Schlafly was also anti-abortion, one of the biggest public opposers, and the stop of the ERA slowed down the road to legal abortion, which happened 2 years later. All of these victories during the second wave of feminism are what led to and affected the turning point case of Roe v. Wade and the legalization of abortion in 1973.
Roe versus Wade! Roe versus Wade, the case that held our nation in turmoil for 2 decades. Now NBC presents the true story behind the headlines.
You don't have to keep the baby.
I just can't figure any way out of this.
For the first time anywhere, the one-woman story that polarized a nation.
Roe versus Wade is going to the Supreme Court.
Children's lives are depending on me. This is the one I have to win.
Oscar nominee Holly Hunter in the film People magazine called the best TV movie this year. The motion picture event of the year, Roe versus Wade, Monday.
At only 21, Norma McCorvey was pregnant for the 3rd time. Unable to receive an abortion legally in Texas, she was referred to lawyers Linda Coffey and Sarah Weddington. Coffey and Weddington filed a case against Texas's anti-abortion law in 1970 to the Northern District of Texas. McCorvey was known as Jane Roe during the case in order to protect her identity. While the trial was proceeding, McCorvey's pregnancy came to term, but the case continued anyway. The case passed in the district court, but the court refused to grant an injunction that would stop the enforcement of anti-abortion laws. The case was appealed and then brought to the Supreme Court.
We'll hear arguments in number 18, Roe against Wade. Mrs. Weddington, you may proceed whenever you're ready.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court. The instant case is a direct appeal from a decision of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Texas. The court declared the Texas abortion law to be unconstitutional for 2 reasons. First, that the law was impermissibly vague, and second, that it violated a woman's right to determine to continue or terminate a pregnancy.
Thank you, Mrs. Weddington. Mr. Floyd?
I do not believe it can be done. There are situations in which, of course, as the court knows, no remedy is provided. Now, I think she makes her choice prior to the time she becomes pregnant. That is the time of the choice. It's like more or less, the first 3 or 4 years of our life, we don't remember anything. But once a child is born, a woman no longer has a choice. And I think pregnancy may terminate that choice as well.
Maybe she makes her choice when she decides to live in Texas.
The court considered for 2 years and finally came to their verdict.
Good evening. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions. The majority in cases from Texas and Georgia said that the decision to end a pregnancy during the first 3 months belongs to the woman and her doctor, not the government. Thus, the anti-abortion laws of 46 states were rendered unconstitutional.
The court case represented a high point of abortion controversy during the second wave of feminism. But even after that, the colliding viewpoints did not subside.
In this instance, the Supreme Court has withdrawn protection for the human rights of unborn children, and it is teaching people that abortion is a rather innocuous procedure provided that there are proper legal safeguards. I think that the judgment of the court will do a great deal to tear down the respect previously accorded human life in our culture.
How many millions of children prior to their birth will never live to see the light of day because of the shocking action of the majority of the United States Supreme Court today? Whatever their legal rationale, 7 men have made a tragic utilitarian judgment regarding who shall live and who shall die. In spite of this horrifying decision, the American people must rededicate themselves to the protection of the sacredness of all human life.
Progressive people believe that a human being comes into existence at the time of birth. There are other people who believe that a human being comes into existence at the time of conception, and there are still other people who believe that a human being comes into existence any time during that 9-month continuum. So the people who believe that a human being comes into existence at conception or any time before birth feel that abortion is murder.
So of course, the controversy continued.
Abortion as a topic still remains a mainstream issue as of now due to the constant backlash and potential undue burdens a woman is faced with. On the one-year anniversary of the Roe v. Wade decision, the annual March for Life was birthed as thousands of pro-life protesters gathered in Washington to protest what they thought to be the unjust ruling of legal abortion. This, however, was simply the protesting of opposing views. Certain cases made the court ruling's power questionable. In the case of Boston abortionist Kenneth C. Edelin, the very purpose of the pro-choice law was challenged. In 1975, Edelin was accused of murder of an unborn child after performing a lawful abortion. Edelin was charged with manslaughter due to the confusion of the age of the fetus, as prosecutors did not know if the 22-week-old fetus was capable of surviving outside of the womb. Fortunately for Edelin, the case was overturned by the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court in December of 1976. It was cases such as this that caused abortion to remain as one of the most controversial issues in the feminist movement.
So women, back in that time when I first got to Boston City Hospital, could in fact, and did in fact, have had access to abortion services at Boston City Hospital, but they had to be shown to be either seriously ill and on the verge of death or crazy. So that if a woman wanted to be permanently surgically sterilized, have her tubes tied, her case also had to be presented to the Abortion and Sterilization Committee, and they would again rule on her case and either grant her request or not to be permanently surgically sterilized. But the woman had to meet 3 criteria. Number 1, she had to be married. Number 2, she had to have at least 2 children. And number 3, she had to have her husband's permission.
1977 brought about the Hyde movement, a court ruling that established that states have no obligation to fund abortion under public assistance laws, no matter the circumstance. This ruling was extremely controversial, and later in 1983 it was ruled that employee health care benefits do not cover abortion unless it was detrimental to a woman's health. This was the point when abortion became less of a moral issue and more of a governmental issue. These limitations on legal abortion brought on the Planned Parenthood versus Casey court ruling. A limitation could not be placed on abortion unless it caused no undue burdens. In other words, nothing could be done to stop abortion laws if they were going to cause unnecessary problems for the women having abortions. Later, in 1992, Clinton took office and issued 5 executive orders. One repealing a policy that restricted federal funding of international organizations that work to reverse abortion laws in different countries, one negating the ban on fetal tissue transplants, one ordering military hospitals to perform abortions, and one ordering the FDA to review the import ban on RU-486, a chemical commonly used to perform abortions. These executive orders brought forth a rather defeated year for pro-life supporters. However, this was reversed when the Hyde movement was renewed and the Freedom of Choice Act, an act that would allow abortions to be a personal matter under all circumstances, was defeated in 1993.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from
I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Hallelujah. This was the kind of conversion the pro-life movement has been praying for.
Here she is!
This was the woman whose name is as familiar as any in the land, the embodiment of the pro-choice cause.
My name is Norma McCorvey, a.k.a. Jane Roe.
I've cheated people out of money. I've sold drugs. I was an abusive alcoholic for, many, many years. I've done a lot against his teachings. But I think the far greater sin that I did was to be the plaintiff in Roe versus Wade.
Norma McCorvey, better known as Jane Roe, came out against abortion and retracted all of her arguments from her case in 1973. This did not change any court rulings from Roe versus Wade. However, this change of heart did incite social discord, as McCorvey was one of the pioneers for abortion rights. Following up on Clinton's executive order, Hoechst AG announced that it would cease all production of RU-486 due to potential health risks. However, later, the New England Journal of Medicine declared RU-486 safe with a 95% success rate. The production of RU-486 that was once halted due to certain concerns began once more. Once it was declared a safe chemical to use, more medically safe abortions were being performed in safe environments. However, with the passing of the Child Custody Protection Act, an act that made it illegal to transport minors across state lines for an abortion, the issue resurfaced. This law was considered a violation by many, regarded as an undue burden to women if their state made it difficult to get an abortion. The reason abortion has become a focal point of the feminist movement is because even though it was ruled that abortion would be legal, it has made difficult and sometimes impossible by local and federal limitations. It was announced as a rite of passage, then made to be an intangible option. Due to the constant onslaught of challenges and limitations legal abortion has faced, it has become the focal point of feminism. It is one of the most tried and frequently defeated cases women have been attempting to pass for years. Even when abortion was considered a legal and personal matter, it was tested and limited. The argument of whether or not the choice is a woman's to make has been an ongoing battle for years and shows no sign of ending. An issue that regards life and death can be difficult to decide on. However, when it has already been decided on, there should not be any more controversy to it. Abortion was supposedly a solved issue, yet it is not.